Do you seriously think this company is ever going to give you a raise? That one sentence did more damage than 2 years of underappreciation ever could. I remember the way he said it, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, like I was a naive intern asking for a miracle. Brad always had that smirk, the kind that made you feel small even when you were the one holding everything together. But let me rewind a bit. My name's Willow. I'm 29. A senior product designer at a fast-growing tech startup in Chicago, or at least that's what my job title said. In reality, I was everything. UI, UX lead, branding strategist, QA backup, and sometimes even the one making last-minute pitch decks at 2 a.m. when the sales team dropped the ball. For 2 years, I carried that company like a second spine. We were scrappy at first. I liked that. Fast pace, big dreams, no red tape. But as we grew, so did the egos, especially Brad's. Our VP of product was the kind of boss who said things like, "We're a family here," while casually ignoring every overtime request and pushing deadlines until weekends bled into weekdays. Still, I stayed. Not because I was afraid to leave. Believe me, recruiters slid into my inbox weekly. I stayed because I believed in the product. I had helped build it from a napkin sketch into something real. I had ownership, not on paper, but in my heart. But you can only be invisible for so long before something snaps. A few weeks before that conversation with Brad, I'd finally decided to advocate for myself. After yet another project I led helped us land a 6-figure client, I scheduled a one-on-one with him. Not to beg, just to ask for fair compensation. What I didn't expect was laughter. "Look, Willow," he said, sipping his overpriced cold brew. "You're good at what you do, but raises aren't based on feelings. We have budgets, okay? Be realistic. Everyone wants more money. You're not special." Then came the dagger. "Do you seriously think this company is ever going to give you a raise?" It wasn't just a rejection. It was contempt, disguised as logic. Like my work had been some kind of charity case. Like I should feel lucky to still have a desk. I walked out of that office quiet, but something inside me had shifted. Because if they weren't going to value me, I was going to make sure they remembered me. Not with anger, not with drama, with precision. I wish I could say I stormed out of Brad's office that day and never looked back. That I quit on the spot and made some dramatic exit. But life doesn't always let you leave on your own terms. I had a mortgage to pay, student loans breathing down my neck, and parents who thought working in tech meant I was already a millionaire. Walking away wasn't an option. Not yet. So I stayed. For now. But something shifted after that meeting. Every day after, I walked into the office with a different kind of awareness. Not bitterness, clarity. I started watching how often people said "great work," but never followed it with action. I noticed how Brad took credit for things he barely understood, and how praise from clients somehow always stopped at his inbox, never reaching mine. 2 weeks after that conversation, I led the UI redesign for a new client in Boston, one of our biggest yet. I stayed up 4 nights in a row, running A/B tests, rewriting interaction flows, even troubleshooting code when the dev team was swamped. When we finally launched, the client was blown away. They doubled their contract on the spot. The next morning, Brad gathered the entire team in the main conference room. He clapped his hands and grinned like he just won a Super Bowl. "This is what leadership looks like, folks," he said. "It's all about vision and execution." And then he pointed to himself. I waited for him to mention me. 1 sentence, 1 thank you. Nothing. When the meeting ended, he passed by me without a glance. That afternoon, our Slack lit up with messages congratulating him. A junior dev even posted a meme calling him Design Daddy. I stared at the screen, jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. Later that day, I messaged Brad and asked for 5 minutes. I told myself to stay calm, professional, detached. I brought up the Boston project and said I wanted to revisit our earlier conversation, see if my recent contributions could be reconsidered for a compensation review. He didn't even look up from his laptop. "We don't reward short-term wins, Willow. One project isn't a raise. Everyone's expected to go above and beyond. That's just baseline. Brad, that contract was worth $500,000. And?" He finally looked up. "That's the company's win, not yours." I nodded slowly. So You're saying I should be grateful just to still be here? He gave a half smile. Now you're getting it. I walked back to my desk numb, but I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I opened my private Google Drive, the one I'd been backing up my work to for months. Every UI wireframe, every design file, every prototype I created, refined, and shipped. All organized, dated, and, most importantly, unshared. That night, I started adding password protection to key files. Quietly, carefully. I wasn't planning revenge. Not yet, but I was done waiting to be recognized. They'd built this product on my back. And if they thought I was disposable, they were going to find out just how much of this company depended on me. A week later, I came back from a short family emergency. Just 3 days off. My sister had a medical scare, and I needed to be there. I didn't ask for PTO. I just notified HR and set up all my deliverables in advance. When I walked into the office Monday morning, something felt off. People looked at me, then quickly looked away. There was a weird tension in the air, like I had walked into the middle of a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. And then I saw the whiteboard in the war room, our collab space where I used to lead every design sprint. My name had been erased. In its place, Caitlin. Caitlin was a new hire I'd helped on board just 3 months ago. Fresh out of a boot camp, bright-eyed, enthusiastic, eager to learn. She'd shadowed me for weeks. I showed her my workflows, gave her access to my templates, even helped her prepare for her first big presentation. Now, her name was written under the heading, Design Lead. I froze for a moment before walking straight to Brad's office. He didn't even pretend to be surprised when I brought it up. Just leaned back in his chair with that same smug look, hands behind his head. Caitlin's been stepping up, he said casually. While you were out, she led the sprint review and handled it well. She's got real leadership potential. I wasn't gone for a vacation, I said, trying to stay composed. And I'm the one who created the framework she used. Brad shrugged. Look, Willow, you've been in that seat for a while. Maybe it's time we shake things up a bit. Bring in some fresh energy. You're still on the team, just focusing more on execution now. That word, execution, landed like a slap. It was corporate code for shut up and do the grunt work. I walked out without saying another word, my chest tight, my vision blurring. Later that afternoon, during our team stand-up, Brad called on Caitlin to present the upcoming roadmap. She pulled up slides I recognized immediately, because they were mine, slightly altered, but mine. And Brad sat there nodding proudly, even adding, "This is the kind of initiative we need." When I tried to speak up to clarify the origin of the designs, Brad cut me off. Let's stay solution-focused, Willow. No need to go down a rabbit hole of who did what. We're all here for the team. I swallowed hard and stayed quiet, but inside, something cracked. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at my ceiling and realized this wasn't incompetence. It was strategic. I was being erased. Slowly. Quietly. And Caitlin, whether she realized it or not, was being used as the replacement. Over the next few days, it got worse. Slack channels I used to lead were now archived. Client calls I had scheduled were reassigned to Caitlin so she could get more exposure. Brad even emailed the leadership team introducing her as the new face of design, thanking her for revitalizing our user interface strategy. It was theft of my work, my role, and my credibility. But I didn't argue. I didn't confront. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I kept working. Silently. What Brad didn't know was that every visual asset, every design system, every layout still lived on my private drive. The team had access to exported versions, sure. But the core logic, the component libraries, the scalability files, they were locked behind permissions he never asked about because he never thought I mattered enough to need leverage. I started logging every interaction, every email, every Slack message. I wasn't just documenting abuse. I was building a case. They thought I was crumbling, that I'd shrink into a quiet corner and accept scraps. But I had something they didn't. Proof. History. And a storm they didn't see coming. I let them believe they'd broken me. For the next few days, I kept my head down. I stopped speaking up in meetings. I stopped suggesting improvements. I even smiled politely when Caitlin asked if I could help double-check her component spacing. The woman was using my exact system and still treating me like her assistant. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I let the performance continue. Because while they thought they were winning, I was laying down my first card. That Friday, just before EOD, I sent Brad an email with a formal request. Please remove any use of my intellectual property from current and future marketing materials unless proper licensing is agreed upon. I copied HR. I attached a time-stamped document detailing which elements I still held design ownership over, based on a loophole Brad himself never noticed. Our contractor clause from my freelance period, which stated that design rights would only transfer upon written agreement. We never signed one. Brad didn't respond until Monday. When he did, it was 2 lines. We appreciate your passion, Willow, but let's not make this messy. You're still part of the team. Let's talk in person. I accepted the meeting. I was calm, cold even. In the room, Brad didn't waste time. This isn't the kind of attitude we expect from senior team members, he started. Threatening legal action against your own company? I'm not threatening, I said. I'm stating facts. The work I created before my full-time hire legally belongs to me, and much of that work is still active in our product today. He leaned back, scoffing. You're really going to go nuclear over a few screens? They're not just screens, I replied. They're the foundation of your entire UI system, and without access to the originals, scaling your platform will be complicated. Brad stood up. If you're trying to hold the company hostage, Willow, I promise you won't like where this goes. I stood too, slowly, meeting his eyes. I'm not holding anyone hostage. I'm just walking away from what was mine. Then I did it. I revoked all access. The design library, the Figma files, the developer notes, the branding decks, everything. Gone in under a minute. I didn't delete anything. Just transferred it all to a private archive, locked under my legal name. Brad's face twisted, red creeping up his neck like a heat rash. You're going to regret this, he hissed. Maybe, I said, grabbing my bag. But at least now you know how it feels to have something taken from you. I walked out, leaving behind the stunned silence of a man who had never been challenged, let alone by someone he once thought was easy to ignore. They thought I had just cut off my own legs. What they didn't realize was, this wasn't my final move. It was the bait. The Monday after I revoked access, things inside the company imploded faster than I expected. I wasn't there to see it in person, but my inbox, Slack, and voicemail told the story loud and clear. The dev team was panicking. Engineers couldn't access the master design library. Marketing lost the brand guidelines. Product couldn't finalize the prototype for the investor pitch deck. Apparently, Brad had no idea how fragile the system really was, or how much of it was still tethered to me. By Tuesday, they tried to recover backup files, but what they found were outdated exports and non-scalable assets. The UI they depended on? It had evolved so much that even a slight mismatch would crash half their layouts. The product wasn't just pretty, it was designed for growth, and now that backbone was gone. I didn't say a word. I had already started the real plan. A week earlier, before pulling the plug, I had reached out to a VC analyst I knew from a past client project. Just casually, I floated a question. If a company raised funding based on assets it didn't legally own, would that concern investors? She responded within minutes. Highly. Why? I gave her enough to look deeper, quietly, discreetly. I wasn't aiming for drama. I was aiming for accountability. But the drama came anyway. Thursday afternoon, the company was set to pitch at a high-profile Series A event. 5 VCs in the room. Big names. This was supposed to be Brad's moment, and that's when the fire started. 10 minutes into the pitch, one of the VCs interrupted. Can you confirm that your current product design and branding are under full legal ownership by the company? Brad blinked, thrown off. Of course. It's all internal. The VC tilted his head. Because we received a notification this week suggesting otherwise, related to copyright claims tied to former contracted work. Brad tried to recover. He fumbled something about internal transitions and employee turnover, but the room was already cold. Another VC leaned in. "So you don't currently have access to the original files used to build your interface?" Brad stammered. "We're working on internal restructuring, but the IP is, The pitch was dead. By the end of the day, the VCs pulled out. Every single one. No questions, no second chances. And just like that, the company's biggest opportunity was gone. That same evening, I got a message from Caitlin. Short. Awkward. Just, "I didn't know. I'm sorry." I didn't reply. Later that night, I checked LinkedIn and saw Brad had removed VP of Product from his headline. That's when it hit me. He was spiraling. But it wasn't over yet. The next morning, I published a short Medium post. Nothing inflammatory, just the truth. Why I walked away from a company that built its culture on silence. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. But it went viral. Designers shared it. Engineers reposted it. Founders commented. People knew exactly which startup I was talking about. And suddenly, the silence Brad built his power on was cracking wide open. By the following week, I had 3 offers. One from a rival startup. Ironically, one Brad had mocked in a meeting 6 months prior. They offered me double my old salary, full creative control, and remote flexibility. But I didn't take it right away. First, I accepted a speaking invite at a Women in Tech conference. They wanted someone to talk about boundaries, ownership, and knowing your value. I said yes. When I walked on stage, I wore the same navy blazer I had worn to that humiliating meeting with Brad months ago. I opened my talk with, "Someone once asked me if I seriously thought I'd ever get a raise in a company like that. I didn't get the raise. I got something better. Perspective. And a plan." Afterward, as I stepped off the stage, I saw him. Brad, standing near the back, face pale, hands in his pockets. He didn't say a word. Just looked at me like he finally understood what he'd lost. I nodded politely, walked past him, because I wasn't angry anymore. I had already won. I hadn't seen Brad in person since that conference. He didn't speak to me, just stood there, back against the wall, like a man watching the empire he built with ego and shortcuts slowly sink into the ground. I didn't need to say anything. The silence between us spoke loud enough. You underestimated the wrong person. After the event, I went home to a new inbox, one filled with interview requests, podcast invitations, and LinkedIn messages that started with some version of, "We've been following your story." I didn't post anything inflammatory. I didn't gloat. But I did keep telling the truth. And the truth traveled fast. Over the next few weeks, the dominoes inside the company began to fall. First, it was the investors. After the disastrous pitch meeting, the firm that had led their seed round pulled out entirely, calling it a fundamental breach of trust. Without that money, payroll became a problem within 2 pay cycles. Then came the press. One tech blog picked up my Medium post and, after connecting the dots, ran an exposé titled, "The Startup That Silenced Its Star Designer," and paid the price. It was brutal and accurate. They even managed to get an anonymous quote from an internal employee confirming everything. How I was sidelined, how my assets disappeared overnight, how Brad's temper boiled over behind closed doors when things unraveled. From there, the staff began to bleed out. Engineers left first, then 2 project managers. Finally, Caitlin posted an update on LinkedIn. Taking time to reflect and reset. Lessons learned the hard way. Brad tried to do damage control, of course. He issued a limp 2-paragraph statement on the company's website claiming recent challenges were being addressed internally. But by that point, no one believed him. The comment section beneath the blog post was merciless. Former employees, freelance collaborators, even ex-clients. Everyone had a story. And Brad? He became the story. Recruiters stopped calling. Conference invites vanished. Even the board, his former drinking buddies, began distancing themselves. One resigned entirely, citing ethical misalignment. Another leaked an email chain showing that Brad had ignored early warnings about design ownership months before things exploded. Then came the final nail. A lawsuit filed by the parent company of a major client alleging fraud due to misrepresented IP ownership in their contract. The damages? 7 figures. Brad had no defense. The files in question were mine. The contract language was clear. And even if he wanted to fight it, he couldn't. The company didn't have the legal budget anymore. I watched it unfold not with joy, but with clarity. This wasn't revenge, it was accountability. But don't get me wrong, seeing a man who built his identity on arrogance, manipulation, and power games get publicly dismantled? Yeah, that part was satisfying. A month later, I ran into one of our old developers at a networking event. He looked stunned to see me. Then he laughed and said, "Brad's consulting now, some sad little agency no one's heard of." I asked, "How's that going for him?" He grinned. "Let's just say, clients Google everything." That's the thing Brad never understood. In tech, your reputation is your resume. And once people start whispering your name with a warning attached, you don't just lose jobs, you lose access. The week after, I officially accepted an offer from a company that actually believed in building with people, not on top of them. Same industry, better culture. My title? Director of Product Design. And on my first day, they handed me a blank canvas and asked, "Where do you want to start?" I smiled, because for the first time in years, I was the one asking the questions. I thought the story was over. Brad was out of the industry. The company had quietly shut down its operations, laying off the remaining skeleton crew with no severance and no warning. Their domain redirected to a blank page with a sad little message, "We'll be back soon." They never came back. And I had moved on. A new role, a new team, real respect. People who saw me, not just as a tool, but as a creative force. I was leading design sprints, mentoring junior talent, sitting at the table for strategy meetings. For the first time in a long time, I was building without fear of being erased. But then something unexpected happened. 6 months into my new role, I was invited to speak at a major design conference in New York. Not just as a panelist, but as the keynote speaker. It was the kind of spotlight I never chased, but now I had earned it. The theme that year? Legacy and design, what we leave behind. I almost declined. The idea of standing on a stage again, telling that story one more time, felt heavy, but my CEO encouraged me. "You've changed the way people talk about ownership and credit," she said. "You are the legacy." So I accepted. The venue was packed, over 1,000 people. Designers, founders, investors, students, people from every layer of the tech world. I wore black, simple, confident. And when I stepped up to that podium, the room quieted instantly. I began not with my story, but with a question. What do you do when someone tries to take your name off your own work? I let the silence hang before continuing. I told them everything. From the first time Brad dismissed my raise request to the day the company collapsed under the weight of its own theft. I walked them through the silence, the manipulation, the theft of ideas, and the quiet war I waged not with rage, but with receipts. And then I said this. We talk a lot about innovation in tech, about disruption, but the biggest disruption I ever caused didn't come from a product. It came from refusing to be erased. The audience stood. Applause shook the room. After the speech, people lined up to speak with me. Young designers with tears in their eyes, veterans who'd seen their own work stolen by louder voices. I felt something shift that day. Not just in them, but in me. The story wasn't heavy anymore. It had become power. But that wasn't the twist. The twist came 3 weeks later. I got an email from a journalist at a major tech publication. They were doing a follow-up on the startup collapse from a year ago. Turns out, a former employee had leaked internal audio recordings, ones Brad never knew existed. They wanted my comment. I didn't even need to listen to them. But curiosity won. So I did. Brad's voice came through, scratchy and smug. "Willow? She's a great worker, but she's soft. She won't push back. Hell, if we wanted, we could replace her in a week and no one would notice." Another clip. "We don't owe her credit, she gets paid. That's credit enough." And then the one that sealed it. I've been around long enough to know people like her don't have power unless we give it to them. The journalist sent me the article draft. The piece wasn't just about me anymore, it was about a pattern. They had spoken to 3 other former employees, all women, all talented, all discarded. The story dropped the next day under the headline, "Erased: How one tech exec built his career on silencing women and watched it burn." It trended for a week straight. A few days after, I got one final message from Brad's old email address. Just one line. "I made a mistake. I'm sorry." I didn't reply. Some ghosts don't deserve closure. Instead, I printed the article, folded it, and slid it into the back cover of my personal design journal, the same one I used to sketch the interface that made his company millions. Because that's the truth, isn't it? He thought he owned the legacy, but legacies aren't built in silence or in stolen credit or in boardrooms filled with men who all think the same. They're built when someone says no more and makes it stick.